welcome everyone to this event on youth and democracy in times of crisis, which has been organized by the OECD Public Governance Directorate in the event of the OECD Youth Week of 2021. My name is Federica Coco. I'm a journalist at the Financial Times, and I will be your moderator for this event. We are going to start with some opening remarks from a number of very distinguished speakers, and then we're going to move to our panel discussion. And I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'm going to leave the floor to you to ask some questions, and then we're going to have a final closing remark. So first, we'll start with the opening remarks from three main speakers. We'll have Mr. Jeffrey Schalgenhauf. He's the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Then we'll have Ms. Maria Kaisa-Aula, who's the State Secretary in the Ministry of Finance in Finland. And finally, we'll have Mr. Raymond Knops, who's the State Secretary for the Interior and Kingdom Relations of the Netherlands. So I'm going to now give the floor to Mr. Jeffrey Schalgenhauf, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear State Secretary Aula, dear State Secretary Knops, dear panelists, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to today's event, Youth and Democracy in Times of Crisis, in the context of the OECD Youth Week. The COVID-19 crisis presents a serious stress test for governments and the democratic model of governance. The loss of jobs, disrupted access to education, and negative impact on mental health are leaving painful scars on our societies, especially on the young. Beyond the immediate impact on young people's lives, OECD evidence demonstrates that times of economic and social uncertainty can negatively affect citizens' trust in government. In a recent public consultation conducted by the OECD amongst youth associations, more than 1 in 3 respondents reported that their trust in government had decreased since the onset of the crisis. As of 2021, less than 5 in 10 young people in OECD countries trust their government. The way in which governments are addressing the crisis for youth is likely to have an important impact on their confidence in government and, more fundamentally, their association with the democratic process. Already, youth satisfaction with democracy has declined in absolute terms and relative to older cohorts at comparable stages of life. The OECD Secretary General said it this morning: youth must be at the heart of an inclusive recovery. Action to support young people must be holistic and involve youth at all stages of the policy process. We need to go the extra mile to reach out to youth, experience barriers due to their socioeconomic background, gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religion, disability, or migrant status. The OECD Youth Action Plan, adopted by OECD ministers in May, identifies key actions that countries can undertake to improve young people's lives and livelihoods. Based on the action plan and the valuable inputs received from young people, the OECD will work towards a youth recommendation to be adopted by our ministers. The recommendation will also draw on insights and good practices from the OECD report, Governance for Youth, Trust, and Intergenerational Justice, Fit for All Generations, which makes 3 things very clear. First, investments in youth-responsive policies and services pay off. When youth succeed in their transition to autonomy, societies and economies will harness their productive potential. However, across the OECD, only 20% of national youth strategies are fully participatory, budgeted, and monitored and evaluated. Second, we must address the gaps in young people's participation and representation in public life. When young people are engaged more systematically in policymaking, they express higher satisfaction with policy outcomes. However, important barriers remain today, as youth tend to vote less and continue to be underrepresented in state institutions, including in parliaments and the central government workforce. And third, we need more evidence to effectively understand and act upon inequalities between different age groups. Already, countries such as Austria, France, Germany, and New Zealand apply ex-ante youth checks to anticipate the expected impact of new laws on young people. The Netherlands are elaborating a generation check, and Canada has assessed the impact of its response and recovery measures across different age groups. While these examples are encouraging, there is scope to consistently apply governance tools to ensure intergenerational fairness of policymaking. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to make use of the valuable evidence, benchmarks, and good practices that we will be discussing today and throughout OECD Youth Week. And let me also take this opportunity to speak directly to the youth here today. I urge you all to speak up in meetings, to make yourself heard, even if you're the most junior person in the room. You might worry that you are too junior or too new to speak up, but never underestimate the value of the experience that you do have, which might very well be pertinent to the situation. Over the course of my career, I've witnessed that often the most innovative ideas and some of the best solutions to problems came from the most junior person in the room. So let us together chart a course for action to strengthen youth people's participation, their trust in the representation, in our efforts to build back better for all. Thank you for the opportunity to join you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schlagenhauf. That was a very inspiring message. I'm now going to give the floor to Ms. Maria Kaisa Aula, State Secretary for the Ministry of Finance in Finland.
I think now you can hear me, don't you? Is this
yes,
fine?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Frederica, and all my colleagues giving these remarks and all the participants. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you in this opening session of the Youth and Democracy in the Times of Crisis. And our the main message of my from Finland is that we try to keep everybody on the board, and this kind of overall policy also keeps the young people on the board. And I will share you some of experiences from Finland, not only from the Secretary of Finance, but also from the whole government, how we have proceeded with the COVID crisis and how we have been able to manage with it, and what is the role of the trust in this respect. And I have to try to, how do I, okay, now, I think one of the reasons you had asked somebody from the Finnish government to comment on this launching event was that the overall level of citizens' trust in government in Finland is rather high in comparison to OECD average, which is as low as 45%. And we see that this overall level of trust, both in government, political parties, media, journalism, and people's trust on each other, this is a very key element of a working democracy. And this is the most valuable resource of Finland and the secret of the many successes during the over 100 years of independence. But we are also worried about the decline in trust that has occurred during this, let's say, last 10 years. And we see that the most decline in trust has occurred among people living outside major population centers, people with less economic means, at lower economic levels and lower levels of education. And this general, this goes also to young people, that young people in those respects decline in the government less than the other people. And I can conclude that in this respect, that all the divisions in the society and all the polarization work against the levels of trust in society. And therefore, we want to tackle that. In connection to the COVID pandemic, we had a so-called citizens barometer from the people from age 15 to 74. And you can here see just kind of a, a slide of how did we take how did we note also to the how can we see the what did the young people under 30 consider, if they considered Finland is a just society at the moment. And you can see that during the COVID crisis, Finnish society is considered to be just by most people, but the percentage decreased during the pandemic in all age groups, and the most in the youngest age group. And if you look at the trusting, how do the people trust in other people, we can see that the trust to each other is at quite high level in general in Finland, but it's lower in the youngest age group than in other groups, and therefore we have to work with that. Of course, the trust of young people in government in times of crisis is interlinked with overall policies of the government. And the platform of the present Marin government is very much committed to promote social, economic, and also regional equality. We want to, in a way, make the Finnish dream possible, so that every young people and every child could become what they would like to become with their best available skills, and independent of their backgrounds economically, socially, and regionally. And constant interaction with NGOs and other groups of society is embedded in the operating cultures of this, but actually also in other governments in Finland. We value civil society. And when it comes to the school and education area, we focus nowadays more on holistic well-being of children and youth in focus, besides the educational attainments. And we also promote collaborative culture in schools and municipalities, so that they would take children and young people's opinions into attention and are aware of them. And also we promote positive parenting. So because the very let's say nutshells or the key of the trust is always built in the family. How do the parents and young people relate with each other? The government in Finland, we didn't kind of cancel all the reforms we had planned during the COVID crisis, and we did actually quite reforms that have lot of where the young people have a lot of interest to. We raised the compulsory education age to 18. This means that we have no fees or costs on high school or vocational education in that age. We launched a major social and health services reform, which is speeding up the access to health services, and we provide training for professionals around school, the others than teachers, to provide help with low threshold, especially on mental health. There is a third program is that pleasant hobbies should be provided for every young people in connection to the comprehensive school, and pleasant means that something they want themselves, not obliged by adults. And then we also fourthly had a national child strategy on board. This is a broad commitment to implementing the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and this includes a child budgeting pilot in our area. So how did we take into attention the concerns of the young people? I was myself sitting in a ministerial group caring for the national COVID strategy, and I can conclude that from April 2020 to this time, September 21, step by step we took more focus on child impact assessments, and also the principle of the best interest of the children and young people emerged on the board of the national agenda of the national COVID strategy. We had ministerial hearings for both children and young people, broadcasted and streamed. We had special funds delivered to the local governments in order to tackle the negative impacts. And this, of course, is the case for this and next year. And they should cooperate with the NGOs and also with their municipality youth councils. We took more students to the universities than we had the previous plans. And I think what was the main value added from the government was that we provided better knowledge and data to the decision making in all levels of society about the concerns and worries of the children and young people. We had a special working group studying the impact of COVID on children and young people and post-crisis measures, and NGOs were along on that working group. And people from 15 to 72 were included in the regular monitor survey. And we also did online surveys analyzing children and young people's speech and their tone in social media during the crisis, because social media is really a key platform for the young people to put their impact. What did we learn? The restrictions did affect the lives of children in many ways, especially friendship, learning, mental health were affected. But most of the children and young people coped pretty well. But the young people over 18 seem to be hard hit because their good life is so much related on the encounters with their peers and outside the family. But the impacts of children and youth seem to be very polarized. And so the children and young people are not a monolithic group, and you can't make assumptions about their views based on a few vocal statements. The findings show that children and youth in Finland were active members of their communities during pandemic. They communicated their concerns, fears, and also hopes very effectively in social media. But unfortunately also the disinformation could be found on the platforms used by them. And according to this, the working group that made conclusions, the children's rights and their special positions and young people's positions are easily disregarded in the emergency conditions and post-emergency measures. And we have to keep up with improving the ways we can hear them during crisis and normal times. And in the end, finally, I wanted to show you some of the a bit more of the data that we collected where we follow in the government the young people's opinions. As you see here, young people have been slightly less worried about the pandemic than others, but their worries have not decreased as much as the older people's worries. But the stress is something that is the key issue. Young people have experienced much more stress during the pandemic than others, and the share of young people experiencing stress has risen about 10 percentage points during the pandemic. And all in all, we certainly, in a way, we recognize that young people are the most hard-hit group of the society, but among young people, there are those in vulnerable situations, immigrants, disabled young people, LGBTQ young people, those whose parents have problems. They are the most vulnerable, and there we have to do much more in Finland. And we want to keep Finland as a country which is where there is not any kind of polarization between the adults and the young people, that we have to be able to have a very good intercourse with all in the society in order to keep up the trust levels in Finland. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really interesting presentation. I thought the data on stress was really striking, but also on a lighthearted note. I really love the idea of a pleasant hobby in school. So now I'm going to give the floor to our last speaker before we start our panel discussion. And that's going to be Mr. Raymond Knops, who's State Secretary for the Interior Kingdom Relations for the Netherlands. Thank you, Mr. Knops.
Good afternoon to all of you. Today, the world is dealing with a fundamental misunderstanding. And this misunderstanding is that politics is only a grown-up's business. And that's a wrong idea, a totally wrong idea. Because in a vibrant democracy, we desperately need the fresh look of young people. We need young people as an equal partner on our discussion tables and in our decision-making processes. In 2018, a committee examined the future-proofing of the Dutch parliamentary system. In its report, the committee issued a warning. The Netherlands really needs to do more to involve young people in the democratic processes. And young people are not only underrepresented in our most influential committees, they are insufficiently heard of for their interests. And that's strange, while today's policy is also about their future. They inhabit tomorrow's world. Take, for example, retirement issues or climate issues. Who will pay for the costs? It's important to involve young people in this in a serious and non-committal way. After all, it touches on the solidarity between generations and thus on the importance of structural forms of youth participation. Young people are eager to contribute and think along. It is important that young people feel that their voice matters, that they matter. In the last years, the Dutch government has given a strong boost to youth participation. Various national youth participation initiatives are supported and initiated by the government. I did it myself in the recent 2 years. A structural dialogue has started between young people and administrators. And above all, in order to prevent future generational inequalities and in order to enhance intergenerational justice, we introduced a so-called generation test. And the generation test is developed in cooperation with youth organizations and advisory boards. It provides civil servants working for the government insights into the effects of new policies and laws on different generations. So not solely the young generation, but all generations, and enables them to take these effects into account. And at the same time, I want to make an appeal to young people as well. Please reject the notion that we are gripped by forces that we can't control. President John F. Kennedy once said, and I quote, "Our problems are man-made, and therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants," unquote. In other words, citizenship is not something you can learn. You have to experience it. We need you on the floor, everywhere. A last remark I want to make is about digital inclusion. We see youth of today as the digital generation, the so-called thumb generation. They are excited for the newest phones, quickly adapt to the latest trends on social media. And digitization, however, can create a social divide. For example, between young people who do not have access to technology and young people who do have. We must not forget digital services are expensive. And not every child or young adult is fortunate enough to get his or her hands on one as easily. Moreover, young people are too easily expected to do everything digitally. Being able to know your way around social media or buying a new pair of shoes is something totally different than knowing your way around the digital forms of the government. And fake news or real news, what's the difference? How can you judge as a young one? Young people also have trouble with finding relevant information on the internet. The latter is of most importance when it comes to governmental services. When you become 18 years old, you will have a lot more administration and bureaucratic things to arrange, as you can imagine on that age. For example, health insurance, a personal digital authentication for civil services, the digital ID, and maybe registration of annual income tax if you have a job. So young people who have difficulty with this are falling behind. In addition to an education program, we can support young people by taking them along in which digital government matters. They have to arrange and when, and how and why they should do this. I come to a final appeal. We need each other. We started as young ones many years ago. I myself as a 27-year-old deputy mayor, and now I'm quite old compared to you, but I'm still in service. But we need people that take over from us, that speak out and that take responsibility for their own future. We are happy to cooperate in a common effort. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, State Secretary. That was a really inspiring appeal. And it reminded me of something that I heard this morning on the radio. I was listening to a youth activist who said that the choice she faced was between being an activist and a fatalist. So that reminded me, I was reminded of those remarks during your speech. So now we move on to the panel discussion. We're going to have some activists indeed, but also some policymakers, and we're going to discuss how to strengthen democracy for and with the youth. So we have representatives of youth associations, and we're going to talk about how governments can strengthen the participation and representation of young people in democratic processes in times of crisis particularly. So I just wanted to remind everyone that you can submit questions through the Q&A box. Some of you have already started, I've seen. And then we'll pick those up later during the Q&A session. So I'm now going to introduce our fantastic speakers. We have Mr. Mete Koban from the UK. He has an organization called My Life, My Day, so we're going to hear about their work. We have Ms. Bettina Bonsutz, who's the head of Children and Youth, Youth Department of the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens and Women and Youth of Germany, of course. And Ms. Ayla Johnstone, chairperson for the Franklin Youth Advisory Board in New Zealand. And finally, Ms. Marta Cristina Rodriguez Sanchez, who's the Deputy Director of International Affairs of the Mexican Institute of Youth. And I'd like to particularly thank these two speakers, the last two speakers, because it is midnight, I believe, in New Zealand, and it's 5 a.m. in the morning in Mexico. And as I was saying to them earlier, I know that my brain would not work then. So thank you very much. So now I'm going to ask the first question to Mr. Mete. You had an organization called My Life, My Say, a youth-led organization that aims to empower young people, especially the most disadvantaged ones, to participate in democracy. So as well as telling us a bit more about the work that your organization does, I'd like to know what 3 key lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic you learned to ensure youth from all backgrounds have a say in building a more inclusive recovery. And what do you think about how governments can support youth organizations just like yours?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you for the very, very kind introduction, and massive thank you to the OECD for putting on such an important event, particularly to strengthen young voices. So my name is Mete. I represent My Life, My Say, which is all about trying to empower young people to participate in democracy. I won't bore you with what the organization does, and I'll give you some examples as I'm answering the question. But I think one of the key things that we need to sort of explore is when we often talk about how we encourage or engage with young people in politics or in democracy, I think we need to define what we mean by young people. I think often we talk about young people as one big homogenous group, but we're not recognizing the intersectionalities that exist within our society. So, for example, particularly in the case of the UK, for example, as a young person of an ethnic minority background, I have various challenges. If you're a woman of ethnic minority background, then you face various challenges. So I think we need to think about the more nuanced approach in terms of our engagement. I think when you look at the pandemic, it's obviously exposed and amplifies a lot of inequalities in our society. And, a lot of the other speakers have already spoken about, sort of very eloquently put forward some of the challenges that face young people, whether it's their, mental health and how their social lives have been impacted, or whether it's their jobs, because we know a lot of young people tend to work in more hospitality sector or insecure jobs, and obviously as a result has suffered from the pandemic, or indeed whether it's the level of education that they've received during the pandemic. My answer to your question about how governments can help give young people a voice in decision making and in politics more specifically is I think we need to go to the root and understand how we can solve long-term democratic engagement. And one of that is looking at how we create spaces within our schools and education system to encourage and foster dialogue around democracy, and how drawing the link between, how is it that, I always say young people, of course, care about issues that affect them. Of course, they care about having a decent roof over their shoulders or a job that pays them basic respect or dignity. But the problem is because we're not educated about how democracy works, often what tends to happen is they don't see traditional forms of politics as a vehicle to address the issues that they care about. So I think we need to look at long-term measures, particularly around sort of how we encourage more political literacy in our schools, and also making sure that we look at this issue of disinformation without wanting to go too far. The other thing that I think we need to do going into sort of coming out of the pandemic is we need to really look at how we can make sure that young people have a voice in recovering. And what I mean is that one of the things that we're working with the UK government here is about setting up task force for this idea of building back better. What does that mean? And are young people leading that? But then also going back to what the previous speaker said, which is actually attaching some financial element to that. So it's not just a sort of a tokenistic youth board, which is just, hey, how would you like to envision the future of the world? But actually you're given proper responsibility, and it's youth-led in its kind of more true sense. And I think that's really, really important. And then I think, the other thing is really thinking about, again, the previous speaker just before me spoke about the digital aspect. And I think it's about going to where young people are to have these conversations. So one of the things we do really well at My Life, My Say is we work with a lot of tech companies. So we work with both Uber and Tinder in both the 2017 and 2019 general elections in the UK. And because we know a lot of young people use Tinder and Uber, and as you're swiping left or right, it gave you the option to register to vote a week before the vote registration deadline. And there's lots of young people who are on those platforms. We also work with Starbucks, for example. We have a concept called Democracy Cafe, where we bring together 30 to 40 young people together in coffee houses across the UK to really kickstart conversations and really trying to make politics much more accessible and bringing politicians and decision makers to those spaces. So I think those are some of the more practical things that we can do. And look, ultimately, I think, you know, what needs to happen is, you know, politicians and governments need to be a bit more serious, particularly around providing more funding to create more of these spaces. We often depend on people's goodwill or their voluntary efforts to be able to create spaces for young people to talk about these issues. But we need to start to see a bit more leadership in, you know, properly funding these opportunities. And I think, you know, this session is a great way to kind of kick us off. So thank you.
Thanks, Mete. That was really interesting. I was going to say thank you for those truth bombs, but then that's too young for me. So I'm now going to ask a question to Ms. Bunzels. I'd like to know about Germany's federal youth strategy, which, as I understand it, aims to do politics with and for the youth. So currently in this context, I'd like to know more about what your ministry does to involve young people and their organizations in addressing the COVID-19 crisis, and particularly what long-term measures after the crisis are going to be taken to associate youth more systematically in the democratic process.
Yes, hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me and for giving me the floor. I'm really looking forward to our discussion, and I'm really interested in the things you have to say to us, to the government. First of all, let me point out, I'm really not wondering about the stress of the young people, and I'm not wondering about the mental health problems, because young people are in a very, very special phase of their life. They are grown up, and they have three key challenges. The first is qualification. They have to get a job. They have to finish school. The second key challenge is they have to get independent, self-reliant. So how does life works on my own? And the third key challenge is the positioning in the society, in the hood. What kind of man, what kind of woman would I like to be in my society? Will I be a fatalist or an activist? Will I be a good neighbor? Will I be a father or a mother? What will I do in my life? And there are so many disruptions during the pandemic. So we do not have to wonder about the stress and the mental health, and we cannot expect that young people, when the pandemic is growing down and we're on the way, but we cannot expect that everybody is smiling after this. It is not finished by taking like this, not for the young people. So the first thing we have to do is to listen what they say. And the participation of young people in policy making and politics is very, very, very important. So our youth strategy, which you pointed out, has the conviction shared responsibility, politics for, with, and from young people by the youth. And it's not only the title, it's also the guiding principle for our youth strategy. And it is the first time that the whole government from Germany has a youth strategy. And every ministry has its project, has its targets it claimed, and every ministry is doing some participant issues. Some more, like our ministry, some are on the way. I would like to tell you about our different participant formats. For example, youth audits, or a great conference, we called it Youth Policy Days, or some federal youth conferences. And we are aware that the younger generation was and is especially hit by the restriction coming along with the coronavirus pandemic. For this reason, the ministry started some more extra dialogues with the young people and representatives, of course, then in a digital way, because we do not have any public places anymore. Everything was closed and there were no possibility to meet each other. We are also aware that the new governance tools, such as impact assessments, can help to integrate the concern of young people more systematically in policy making. As one step, our ministry implemented a so-called youth check. Youth check to assess the impact of legislation on young people aged between 12 and 27 years. This may help us to address the considerable challenges faced by many young people as part of our recovery plans. We impressively experienced only a short while ago within the context of the youth strategy and our new youth budget, how important the involvement of young people is. In this context, 500 young people developed a multitude of creative project ideas in a hackathon of ideas, of which the best will be put into practice after going through a voting procedure. And during the Youth Polity Days, more than 500 young people developed more than 100 solution strategies for the further development of our youth strategy. We consider this commitment and this creativity of young people very important. Their viewpoint are a viewpoint as experts on their own. And in this respect, it is our task to continue and develop the youth strategy further in the future as well. And please let me come to my last point. Maybe you know that we have elections in Germany on next Sunday. The German people are voting for the new government. And my ministry, the Ministry of Youth, would like to enfranchise the young people to vote in the age of 16. We would like to get more people have an active franchise. This is also a kind of systematically participation. In this time, we have the age of vote from 18, and we would like to degree it on 16.
Thank you, Ms. Buntos. That's really interesting, fascinating to hear that every ministry has a youth strategy, and also that you'd like to extend the voting age to 16. That's a big debate in the UK, and not everyone is in favour, interestingly. So I can see Ayla has some thoughts on this. So I'm gonna give the floor to Ayla. I've got a question for you first. So you're part of the Youth Advisory Board in Auckland, New Zealand. So can you tell me how you and your fellow members experienced and reacted to the COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe some examples of initiatives that were designed and implemented together with local authorities I know you've worked on?
Tēnā koutou. Hello, everyone. My name is Ayla Johnstone, and I am the chairperson of Franklin Youth Advisory Board. We are a board of volunteer rangatahi from Franklin, Auckland, New Zealand, who represent the youth of our community to our local elected decision makers. Rangatahi means young people in Māori, the Indigenous language of New Zealand. Thank you so much for having me here today alongside such respected individuals. I found that many of the groups and organizations in my community that successfully engage with youth were led by youth, such as the Student Volunteer Army that gained thousands of volunteers during the pandemic. Young people came together to deliver essential groceries to those across the country who are unable to leave their homes or institutions providing care. Youth-led initiatives understand what is needed to connect with youth successfully. By breaking everything down into accessible language, by avoiding jargon and using accessible fonts and relevant visual aids, Franklin Youth Advisory Board are able to actively portray youth voice in local government proceedings. Social media is our primary platform for communication, as this is what works for our young community. While we are appreciative of the public authorities who are making an effort to engage with youth, they are primarily concerned with micro concepts such as education. Youth, however, are thinking about bigger things than our own individual futures in education. The growing mental health crisis, the looming threat of climate change, and the increasing poverty gap are evident and terrifying. One local high school found that almost 10% of students were dropping out of school to support their families during the pandemic. These rangatahi may not have time to worry about their education because they are too busy avoiding homelessness and struggling with terrifying levels of stress, loneliness, and mental health challenges. In 2020, both national and local government provided funding to New Zealand mental health helplines. However, this was not publicised widely enough, nor on the right platforms for the majority of youth to be aware and utilise these resources to the fullest. We've learned that our community of rangatahi do care about what the government is doing. However, they feel like what the government is doing rarely coincides with their values and needs. Whanaungatanga in Māori means maintaining a sense of belonging, and my board creates whanaungatanga between our rangatahi and local government, which is an important measure to make youth feel heard. So how can we create this whanaungatanga everywhere? Firstly, don't just include us in conversations, include us in the decision making. Listen to what our priorities are because we're concerned that they're not the same as yours. Secondly, provide us with an actual plan and let us watch it unfold. Market it properly and places will see. Most of us don't watch the news, but we're on Instagram every single day. Finally, tell us everything and tell us in accessible language. We're on the internet 24/7. We're not that hard to find. If you need help, recruit a group of youth, such as a youth advisory board, to rewrite your 30-page plans into one page with headings and pictures or short videos. Be transparent. Tell us whether or not you're going to do something and then tell us why. Tell us everything. Thank you again for having me here today, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes of this discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Johnstone. That was really interesting. I'm particularly fond of your hatred of jargon and just inaccessible language. I completely agree, really couldn't agree more. So now we've got Ms. Marta Cristina Rodriguez Sanchez, who's the Deputy Director of International Affairs for the Mexican Institute of Youth. Ms. Santiago Rodriguez, Mexico has got a national youth program for the years going from 2019 to 2024, and their aim is to promote the youth association with democracy and youth rights. So how do we define youth rights in Mexico, and what are some of the practical steps that have been taken to protect and make young people able to exercise these rights?
Hello, thank you. First of all, on behalf of the Director General of the Mexican Institute of Youth, Mr. Guillermo Santiago Rodriguez, I would like to express our gratitude for the space and for the opportunity to dialogue with such distinguished colleagues who work tirelessly for youth every single day. So how do you define youth rights in Mexico? Well, first of all, I would like to start saying that it's based on the principle of the political constitution in the United States. That it's also like the base for the creation of the Mexican Institute of Youth that was created in January 1999. And since then, the National Youth Program is part of the planning instruments of the National Democratic System, with the objective of establishing the guidelines of an inclusive youth policy capable of promoting and opening opportunities for the human, social, and productive development of young Mexicans in their capacity as strategic agents of national development. So the elaboration of this program is based on two aspects of the national legal order. The first refers to the norms that govern of well, the first refers to the Constitution of Mexico, and the second to the matters of the youth of the entities and dependencies of the federal public administration. In this regard, the law of the Mexican Youth Institute is really relevant. No, in addition to the regulatory framework described, the principles and criteria that guide the development of the New Nation project have resulted in the recognition of young people in the National Development Plan that includes the years 2019 and 2024 as the strategic actors in public national life. So just to sum it up, the National Program of Youth 2019-2024 satisfy the mandate of the law of the Mexican Institute of Youth that established that its objective will be to guide the national youth policy, which must be consistent with the objectives of the National Development Plan and with the sectoral, institutional, and special programs referred to in the planning law. I know it's kind of a tongue twister, but well, that's our constitutional references. So in this sense, for Mexico, the organic statute of the Mexican Institute of Youth considers young people between 12 and 29 years of age, with recognizing that throughout this period, their needs change and they get deepened, affecting their exercise of rights and their full development of the transition of their biographical journey. From this perspective, it is possible not only to notice more clearly the complexity of the youth, but also to generate a specific and differentiated intervention that contribute to the attention of such delicate phenomena as teenage pregnancy and the protection of the right to quality and the right to access to a quality education program that it's in a challenge that it's insurmountable to guarantee the well-being of youth, especially considering the role of formal education as a tool for social mobility, also the accessibility to the formal labor market, or the protection of the violence and insecurity, the comprehensive healthcare, among others. So understanding and addressing the problems of this diverse age group, whose reality is inscribed in heterogeneous geographical and socio-political settings, is essential to address this challenge for public institutions within the framework of a new governmental paradigm based on the principle of austerity and respect for the rule of law as a mean to guarantee social justice. Limiting the importance of youth to strict demographic terms will mean subtracting the strategic value they have as agents in the route of renewal of the public life of the nation. So some of the concrete actions taken to protect youth from our institute, it's, for example, the development of a youth perspective, that it's the name, youth perspective, that the objective of this perspective is that assume that young people are part of the social system in which their lives take place, and also to recognize the strategic importance of youth in front of the social group in each of the various spheres where they interact, both among young people and with people from another generations. So we develop this practical and methodological tool that allows identifying, developing, and promoting mechanisms that guarantee the well-being of young people. So having a youth perspective will allow a broad, inclusive, and respectful definition, as well as encouraging of the diversity in all its action of youth. Also, we are in more international sphere. We are promoting the ratification of the Ibero-American Convention of the Rights of Young People, given the importance of advancing in the recognition of the rights and capacity of young people through normative frameworks with international repercussions. In JUVE, by its acronym in Spanish, our institute developed a strategy aimed at ratifying the Ibero-American Convention of the Rights of Young People that especially recognizes the right of young people. So the adoption of these type of measures will allow to lay the foundation of guaranteeing legal framework in favor of the rights of young people, serving as a reference from similar processes in other regions of the world, specifically our region, our Latin American region. So also, and I'm so sorry, I'm trying to wrap it up. I wouldn't like to stop mentioning the components carried out from our institute that, for example, in the definition, our institute in the definition and implementation of national policy in favor of Mexican youth seeks to promote the integral development of young people so that they are recognized as strategic subjects and actors in the country decision, and recognizing the importance of addressing mental health problems in the young population related to confinement by COVID-19, and in collaboration with federal, international, and academic authorities, we developed this component that it's called Young Contact Youth Care Network, a program that was launched to help improve the quality of life of adolescents, young people, and their communities during and after the health emergency through actions of attention of mental health, referral in situation of violence, intergenerational support, and educational actions, sorry. Also, and we develop some public spaces called clubs for peace that emerge as an alternative to planned community, as well to generate spaces for care, prevention, and protection of health through healthy encounters for coexistence and social participation. And these spaces was actually generated as a tool for the implementation of the national strategy for the prevention of addictions at a municipal, not only a national, but also at a municipal level. So I could just carry on and on, but I think that this sum it up all of the main actions that from our institute and in the framework of our national program, youth program, are developed to guarantee the protection of the human rights of our Mexican youth. And it's really, really important for us to say that Mexico is the second country with the largest number of young people in Latin America, surpassed only by Brazil, which doubles us in territory and triples in population. So for this reason, is enough to recognize that young people are substantive and inseparable part of the transformation of the country. And only admitting that their diversity, their participation, their courage and well-being are unavoidable elements, we are going to transform our country and our world. And also, we are convinced that all the aforementioned aspirations and objectives can only be achieved if we manage to consolidate what is stated in the Sustainable Development Goal number 17, solid and inclusive alliances of the 2030 agenda. So we think that today, more than ever, as governments, we have the great challenge of not failing the youth. The participation of young people, international and intergenerational solidarity are key to achieving inclusive, fair, and resilient communities that contribute to the development of well-being and happiness for our youth. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rodriguez Sanchez. It sounds like you have a lot of initiatives, and I really appreciated your points on the importance of social mobility as well. So we're now going to move on to the Q&A sessions. So we've seen some of the questions here. I'm just going to have a look. There's already quite a few. Actually, I'm going to be very selfish, and I'm going to start with a question for Ms. Bonsutz, which I wrote down earlier. So besides youth conferences and audits, can you give us concrete examples of youth participation at the federal level in Germany?
Yeah, thank you for your question. May I tell you something more about our youth budget? It's the first time that young people in Germany are given a responsibility for 1 million euro. And this youth budget works in the hand of the young people. So they made a hackathon of ideas, and then they have a process to find out which are the best ideas. And now we have 10 ideas, and these 10 ideas will be filled with life. Every of this idea is getting 100,000 euros. And we have, we can say, a youth jury, 10 young people who are on the side of the government. And they are holding the hand on the projects, and that everything is working good. And they are also a kind of advisory board for us for this project. And it's a new experience for everybody, and I'm really looking forward to do this. And I would like to point out a second thing. In Germany, we see that the young people are acting in a very, very high solidarity way. Not only with standing the pandemic crisis together, but also with more engagement in their neighborhood, for example, and some other things, or in volunteer services or in youth organization. But it is particularly hard, I pointed out, for everyone. And so in May 21, the federal government has launched a really, really big action program. It's called Post-COVID Action Program for Children and Young People after, yes, post-COVID, for the years of 2021 and 2022. And this budget has 2 billion euros. And the half of the budget, 1 billion euro, is to dedicate it and to reduce learning gaps of pupils by targeted support measures in mathematics and some other key issues in school. And the other half of the budget aims an additional measure for children, young people, and families in the field of early childhood education, sports, leisure time, holiday activities, and support for children and young people in everyday life. And this is a very, very important program for our government. And so I'm really glad that we can support many young people with this program.
Oh, great. Thank you. That was really interesting. We've got a really interesting question here from Adeline Bryan from Lie Detectors. And as a former fact checker, I really appreciate this organization. So I'm going to ask Mette and Ayla what they think about this. How do you think we can equip young people to fight the infodemic crisis? I'm assuming this is like the fake news crisis. Is there best practice, in your opinion, on integrating these type of skills of, I guess, parsing through information in the education curriculum? So Mette, do you want to start?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think firstly we have to understand, what leads to people to sort of, believing in alternative sort of source of information. And part of it is because of that mistrust between decision makers and citizens. And, part of it is because politics tends to not be representative of society. So, it doesn't look like society in the terms of when you look at, I got elected at the age of 21 as a councillor in London. The average age when I got elected was 66 in London. So you can already see the difference of like how young people will look at their institutions and think, no one looks and sounds like me. So I think there's an issue of representation in politics. And obviously when you look at the number of women and ethnic minorities and people with disabilities, then you can go on. And of course you can add class into that mix too. Then obviously there's an issue where, politicians or decision makers have made promises and have not delivered. So that leads to that mistrust as well. And partly because of the lack of education as well. Sometimes, like I look in what's happening in America right now, where, so many people were enthused to vote for the first time and, went out to vote, and their expectations of what the president of the US can deliver is right up there. And the reality of what the president can deliver is probably right here. So that expectation is probably not going to be met. And then how do you then, not sort of further disillusion those people going forward to sort of future elections? But I think on your point, which is a really good question, is, we do have to think about how we strengthen, like the critical thinking skills of young people, how to question sources. And I think a lot of that has to happen in our education system. So not typically, I'm not saying that they have to be in like kind of traditional, classroom format of events, but I think we need to start to think about creating spaces within our schools to encourage young people to debate various topics, to look at culture and, our diversity in society. I think we have a huge issue, particularly when it comes to sort of racism, not just in the UK, but many parts of the world, as we've seen, particularly with the Black Lives Matter movement, and obviously how young people have been leading the forefront of that. So I think we need to, really create those spaces where we're encouraging young people to really question sources. And I think, critical thinking workshops and various different things, but just thinking a bit more creative, not just like typically, typical classroom style things. I think we need to be a bit more think out the box, as I say. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Thanks. Ayla, did you have any thoughts on this?
I did actually, not so much around the education system, but as a youth, I might be a bit biased on this, but I have heard significantly more adults in the world believing misinformation than youth who have grown up with Instagram and Facebook every single day of their lives. 9 times out of 10, we know if what we're reading is the truth or not. We know if this is a bad source of information. And then we generally go out and we look for the correct source of information. In New Zealand, regarding vaccines and COVID-19 information, we have really fantastic resources that most youth in my area trust. But I think it's really, really, really important for local governments and policymakers to have their own websites or their own social media platform where they publish every single piece of their own information, so that if I need to know something, I can go directly to the source to find this out. So I don't have to go through hours and hours of people on Facebook saying really random things. I think it's really important for people to be able to go directly to the source.
Thanks, Ayla. And I noticed Meta was nodding as well. It is my experience too that older people tend to especially circulate fake news a bit more frequently, particularly on WhatsApp. So since I'm part of the fact-checking mafia, I'm going to give another question to the lie detectors. We've got a question from Maureen Hassal. I hope I pronounced your name right, Maureen. So her question is on young people, particularly in the global south. There are barriers in place in these countries that limit the amount of participation and representation of young people in the democratic processes. How can we work bilaterally to alive these barriers? I assume to raise them, or to break them. Perhaps Ms. Rodriguez Sanchez has some thoughts on this. Anyone else, if you want to raise your hand, happy to give you the floor, but let's start with Christina.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. So Maureen would like to know, there are barriers to the for young people to take part in the democratic process in countries in the global south. What can we do to break these barriers bilaterally?
Okay, yeah, well, it is a really good question. So one of the first problems that our institute and our Mexican National Youth Program seeks to address is the reduced participation of young people in public affairs, motivated by insufficient spaces for intervention for youth in decision-making processes, as well as the lack of recognition of their work, as engine of change in the various areas of public life. So from our point of view, one of the ways that we address this challenge is through our the aforementioned youth perspective that constitutes a methodological tool through which it seeks to strengthen the mechanism of current articulation between the public institution and young people, supports in the critical challenge of the prejudice that weight on this age group, and promote the effective participation of young people in private, public, and political life, especially under the axis of agency and participation. So the recognition of the capacity that young people have to choose and lead the full realization of their life project in a conscious and responsible way within a framework of, in this framework of imposed structural restriction and the obligation of state obligates the state institutions to guarantee access to inputs and institutional channels sufficient to fully exercise the rights, including that of the effective participation. So also we are really proud that we achieved the amendment of our political constitution in the United States of Mexico, in the United Mexican States, that allows Congress to allow our Congress to present, approve, and I don't know how to say that. The amendment allow Congress to be empowered to enact laws that guarantee the integral development of young people seeking their approval at all levels of the Republic. So this is really a progress for us, because in past times, the Congress was without this function that allows them to make laws for the young people, with the young people. So also we develop a young youth policy. We are developing a youth policy monitoring and evaluation system that allows the youth, the Mexican youth, to be able to learn about the policies that we are making with them and for them, and review them periodically and issue recommendations for their improvement. So not only is a tool for the young people to know what the government is doing, but also to review the policies and also to make recommendations and follow them. So that it's really, really interesting. So I could go on and on. Our institute also has developed a lot of components for to promote the participation of and empowerment of young people, not only in the cities, in the urban area, but also in the rural area.
That's very important.
Yes, so we think that we have a lot of challenges to face, but we are sure that only empowering and promoting the participation on all kinds of negotiation spaces of the youth, we are going to achieve our main goal, that is to improve the
participation. Thank you so much, and sorry to interrupt you, but I've noticed that Ms. Bonzotz had her hand raised, and we have a few more questions to get through.
No, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a very, very important question which we have on the floor, and it is not there is no easy answer, and there's no one answer, but I would like to point out the importance of international youth exchange, when young people meet each other about to rise down barriers. I think it's a very, very important thing to empower young people. It's a kind of politics education, and it's very, very important for intercultural friendship. It's not easy. It's not of course not for for a great number of young people, but it is like if you imagine a stone you put in the water, yeah, you get a ring, and this is also an effect of youth exchange. And there are also many grants or scholarships to take part on these programs, and so there are many organizations who have also multilateral programs, and this is maybe one, but an important thing to pull down some barriers. Thank you.
Yeah, That was a really good point. Thank you so much. I've got a question for Mr. Koban. I, I was saying earlier that I heard a youth activist this morning on the radio talk about how you can be an activist or a fatalist. That was in a conversation about climate change. So we've seen a lot of young people engage in a sort of non-institutionalized forms of participation, particularly on issues of climate change. I've seen, for example, recently London was taken over by some protests at the centre of London from an organisation called Extinction Rebellion. So how do you think governments can take into account and engage with these forms of participation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And of course, that's one of the things that we continue to see. So contrary to, the reports that come out from the media about young people being apathetic, actually what you see is that, young people are becoming much more politicized, particularly with climate change. I mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. In Scotland, when we had the Scottish referendum here, a lot of young people participated for the first time because they had votes at 16 to, Brexit has also politicized, future generations here as well. So there's lots of reasons why young people do care about their future. And they obviously express it in lots of different ways. So it could be via social media, it could be via, protesting, it could be, via poetry, through art, through sports, lots of different ways in which people can express their opinion. I think what governments need to do, and obviously what institutions need to do, is just be flexible in, like, and I don't mean this in any form of criticism, because I understand how government works. I used to work for the Mayor of London, and I'm also a city councillor as well, so I know how institutions work. But I think too often where local authorities or governments do fall into a trap is they often want to create a space where they bring young people to. So you'll often hear of like lots of different various initiatives that are created to kind of encourage more young people into having a say. But I think actually letting young people lead those processes is probably sometimes a better approach. So kind of flipping it completely and going to where young people are. So where do they go to in their day-to-day social, digital lives, and think about how do you connect with them in those spaces. So, again, I mentioned some of the examples of Starbucks and obviously Tinderuba, but one of the things that we do with My Life, My Say is we work with football clubs. So football clubs have community foundations, for example, which work with loads of boys and girls from disadvantaged communities, particularly around employment opportunities or volunteering opportunities. And of course, football clubs are a hub for lots of young people to engage with in their communities. And what we do is through that engagement, through both of the Football Association in England and also the Premier League, we've been able to reach thousands of young people. And rather than, again, like I get people who come to me all the time and say, I've got this really good idea, I want to create this online debating platform, we'll do this or that, and we're going to invite loads of young people. And they often, feel very let down in the end because it doesn't end up getting the engagement they expect it to. I think the better approach is go to where young people already are, let them lead. They've already got the ideas. What you need to do is amplify and support them to scale up what they're doing rather than trying to create something new.
Okay, let them lead then. That's a really good point. We've got a good segue here. You touched upon this, Mette, but this question I think should be for Ms. Bonzots again. From a Canadian perspective, the idea of lowering the voting age to 16 is unheard of and rarely considered. What are the strongest arguments you've seen that would convince people to lower the voting age? And that's from Lina Pulido.
Thank you very much. Okay. I think we have to change the question. What are the arguments to hold up the young people from voting? We have young people who are very self-reliant in the age of 16, who are getting jobs, who are standing on their own. We have young people who are really, really responsible people, and they have all heard about politics and how it works in school. So everyone in this age have a good knowledge, or many people of them have a good knowledge, and they are citizens, and they are voting for their future. So why could they not take part on it? If you are interested in, I would like we would like to send you some more arguments in the chat. I have my colleague here, and we will give you some more papers to this.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I've often heard the argument that if you're old enough to pay taxes and to go to war, then you should be old enough to vote. I was wondering what Mette, Ayla, and Christina thought about this. Anyone want to raise their thoughts first?
Well, I was just going to say, just very quickly, I think where we start to enter a very slippery slope, whether you start to judge whether someone should be eligible to vote or not vote, because there's nothing, Ayla earlier on when she was speaking very eloquently said, that, we're making an assumption that everyone who's older to vote is very well educated to vote. And, how do you start to define these things? In the UK, you can join the army when you're 16. You can vote when you can start working when you're 16. You pay your taxes when you're 16. So you could even get married as well when you're 16. So why can't you vote? I think it's just quite completely unfair. And the other thing is as well, let's not forget, is that young people, particularly between the age of 16 to 18, where we saw with Brexit, for example, they will be living with the outcome of the negotiation and of the outcome of Brexit, for example, for the longest, and they were denied the right to have a vote. And whereas people, later on in their life, who probably will be living with it much shorter, they had the right to vote. And it's not to say, it's us and them, but again, I think when we start to deny people from voting, particularly of the age of 16, I think we start to reinforce that intergenerational divide that already exists in our society. And I think we need to start to be a bit more bold. And I think, what's happening in Germany is amazing. And I wish we can bring you to the UK so you can do it over here too.
If you wouldn't mind me adding just very quickly, I'd definitely like to put it into this perspective of bringing in youth engagement into the government. I can't fathom expecting a 16, 17-year-old to wholeheartedly trust their government, but then their government saying, we do not trust you to tick a box or to vote on this, but you absolutely have to trust everything we say.
That's such a good point. Christina, did you want to add anything?
Well, thank you. It is a really, really interesting debate. Mexico, it's well, I think that it's like the goal to which we aspire, the goal for which we are working, that young population can little by little have the right to integrate to the politics into their lives. It's like the epitome, I don't know how to say that, of this integration of young people to the democratic processes. So Mexico is still, I think that if this it's approved in Germany, will set a ground for all countries to follow it and to learn about the lessons that they are as results of this process. No? So I think.
Do you know if there's much support for this in Mexico, like public support? Is it something that is discussed?
I think that it's not really quite the point of debate. We have the violence and the teenage pregnancy and all of that are most of the issues that of our agenda, not that much of these terms of voting for the young people. But I think it is really important to start to address them in parallel. No, I think that we can have a lot of really good debates that could be a start for this to happen in Mexico and be a beacon for our region in terms of political rights for the young people.
So we only have time for one last question. So sorry about that. If we didn't pick your question, I'm sorry. I hope that you found some insights though in what you've heard so far. The question is addressed from Connor Tertsakis. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It's addressed specifically at Mette, but I think everyone should be able to contribute to this, and in fact, they're interested in this. The question has disappeared. 1 second. I think I know how to find it. Yeah, there it is. So the panel has discussed bringing the political discussion to youth through social media, but we'd like your thoughts on using sports, Premier League and streaming sites like Netflix to bring and raise discussions to fellow young people. So Mette, you've talked a bit about this. Any more thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we can do, and it's a great question, is think about how do we, again, it's like really identifying those mediums in which we know young people follow. So one of the things that we're doing in the UK, particularly right now with My Life, My Say, just as an example, is we're bringing together the political party leaders. So that's including the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, Sir Keir Starmer, which is the leader of the opposition, and Sarah Davey as well. And one of the things we're doing is we're bringing together them with like famous influencers where they do like, you know, Instagram lives and they get interviewed by these famous influencers, and some of these influencers have like millions of followers who, you know, again, you know, these are the types of people we need to reach out to, the people who, you know, as I say to you, is probably don't see traditional forms of politics as a vehicle to address change. So how do you try to engage people who ordinarily you wouldn't be able to capture from organizing a panel style debate in Westminster, for example? Because that's only going to attract, you know, maybe university students who are studying politics, who are probably going to vote anyway. What you need to do is we try to reach out to other people. And I think, as I said, some of the tech companies that we worked with, like Uber, Tinder, you know, identifying where people go to. Some of the Netflix series, Netflix, for example, was actually supportive of our election campaign as well in 2019. And, you know, like some of those tech companies have a huge reach. And I think that could be a massive sort of resource for us to kind of tap into. But ultimately, it needs the will from those companies. And what governments can do, and this goes back to sort of the question of this panel, is one of the things that we done in the 2016 referendum is that at the time, David Cameron at the time when he was the Prime Minister, he called us around a sort of a round table together with some of the biggest tech companies in the UK. And actually we created those partnerships through the Prime Minister, encouraging tech companies to support more youth voter turnout. So what governments can do and what local authorities can do is, although it may not necessarily be the answer, what it can do is it can sort of use its convening power to bring together some of these larger tech companies, which are much more difficult to kind of get hold of or to have access or reach to as a youth organization, and bring it together so you can think about how you can collaborate.
Any more thoughts on this, Ada, Christina? You don't have to.
No, not really. I think that it is really important to make these partnerships between the young people and the networks where they are actually in. So in terms of the work that we have in our institute, for example, Youth Care, it's a component that we developed and we launched, but also by, for example, MTV. You know, it's like was kind of funny for us because we liked it. We didn't know what to expect about this partnership with an institutional government institution and this network that I don't know how young can it be MTV, but I don't know how actualized is also with the young people. I don't know, but it was interesting and it was a success. At the end, it was a nice way for to launch our component and to make different spheres of age groups to learn about our work. So I think that it's kind of the example that we can provide in this arena.
Thank you so much. Ada, did you want to add anything? If not, we can.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I think it's
your last words. Sorry.
I think it's really important to understand the demographic of the specific youth you're targeting before putting resources into something. As an example, my high school was obsessed with Instagram. Every single youth had Instagram at all times. A neighboring high school of ours, everyone was on TikTok. So if you wanted to reach us specifically, you'd use Instagram, and we didn't use any of these other ones, whereas they didn't use Instagram. I think it's really, really important to go speak to these youth in this demographic at a school or at their sports clubs, etc., and ask them what specifically do they use every single day, because a lot of assumptions that we make aren't accurate.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, so I'm now going to give the floor to Ms. Elsa Pilichowski, who's the director of the OECD Public Governance Directorate, and we're going to hear her closing remarks now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederica. Thank you to all. This has been an exceptional panel, I have to say. And I've been very impressed by what we've heard today, the many initiatives and everything. So that is absolutely great. Let me just get my notes right, because I didn't have the notes right. Now I do. But so we heard this. We heard it from our Deputy Secretary General earlier on, and the distinguished speakers of this afternoon. The COVID-19 crisis risks leaving long-lasting scars on young people's trust in government and also satisfaction with democracy. But to extend a little bit the metaphor here, you have all mentioned that these scars build on long existing wounds. Preliminary findings, and that's just an example, from an OECD data collection exercise amongst youth organizations recently over the summer, a few weeks ago, indicates that many of them felt the views of young people had not been incorporated in countries' response efforts, especially in confinement measures and measures to mitigate income loss. You have mentioned it in this panel. This should not be mixed up with the idea that young people are depoliticized, but just that they feel removed from institutional responses and institutional decisions today. I think we've all said that we all can and also must do better in the recovery. We really must seize the chance to rethink democratic governance and make public institutions more representative, inclusive, and responsive to citizens. 7 in 10 youth organizations we consulted reported to be worried about the crisis impact on inequalities across age cohorts. And I think we'll agree here that involving young people in the recovery will be crucial to deliver on the expectations and promote intergenerational justice. The panelists today have provided really many valuable ideas on how to deliver on this goal. And I'd like to highlight a few examples from the discussion to help put in place the right institutions, processes, and tools to deliver for youth and rebuild their trust in government and democracy. Finland pointed to ministerial hearings with children and youth. I thought that was very interesting. Netherlands presented the generation test to anticipate impact of new legislation across age groups. Germany informed us about federal youth strategy, youth audits, youth budgets, as well as the age and the right to vote, and at what age, 16 years old in some at the regional level, at the state level, sorry. Mexico underlined the importance of protecting youth rights, and Mete and Ayla, the youth representatives, have highlighted over and over again that youth wants to partner with governments, and governments should put in place the right structures to really listen and act. And I know that you have mentioned bureaucratic and jargon language, but I need to transfer all these results into bureaucratic and jargon language. And I have 5 key takeaways. First, participatory resourced cross-sectoral national youth strategies can unite different ministries and non-governmental stakeholders behind basically a joint vision for youth, and also mobilize adequate resources. Again, it was very insightful to hear about Germany's federal youth strategy today. Second, the Finnish and Dutch experiences demonstrate that forecasting and impact assessment tools of the policy tools that we have can really help integrate youth and intergenerational fairness considerations in recovery measures and policy making more widely. Third big lesson learned, young people's voice and impact must really be strengthened. We heard it from our younger panelists. All too often, legal barriers, the lack of spaces for youth to engage, stereotypes, but also jargon language, continue to represent significant barriers. Fourth, and as shown by Mexico's experience and its national youth program, protecting youth rights and helping young people exercise them in times of crisis can help in reinforcing democracy. Reinforcing the civic space is often a very good way of reinforcing youth involvement in policymaking. Fifth, and finally, We cannot afford to leave any young person behind, especially the most vulnerable ones. And for instance, we've heard there are many projects in the works, and we've heard some today, but there are also examples in Belgium, Sweden about supporting socially vulnerable youth or young migrants. With these 5 lessons together, we can say now very easily that young people and helping them, empowering them requires a strategic whole of government approach. There are also a number of national and global challenges on the horizon, and we know that you are very sensitive to the environmental issues, and so are we. It is really crucial that governments strengthen their democratic systems to ensure that they can tackle these challenges and retain citizens' trust in the democratic systems while moving on addressing those challenges. And this is where we need the youth, I would say, almost the most is really to build ambitious initiatives and lead change as they always do. And I think you have mentioned leading a number of occasions as well. To support governments in this endeavor, the OECD has started to work on the new youth recommendation that would really provide guidance on how to empower young people, support their well-being, and ultimately strengthen their trust in government and democracy. We had the youth consultation on this recommendation this morning. We will also soon publish a second policy paper on youth and COVID-19. A year from the outset of the crisis. It will be informed by what we heard from youth organizations about their concerns and their priorities for the recovery, as well as also by an analysis of the integration of youth and intergenerational commitments in countries' recovery measures. Finally, I really invite you to tune in to the remaining events of the Youth Week to debate the challenges faced by youth and how we can work towards a brighter future for all generations. With that, I thank you very much. And again, thank you very much to all the panelists for the great debate this afternoon. And thank you to the great moderator, Federica.
Oh, that's very kind. I just wanted to encourage everyone to take part in the remaining events. There's a hashtag, which is hashtag OECD Youth Week. So if you want to share your thoughts, that's sort of the theme of the event, isn't it? To just sort of a conversation between generations. And I just wanted to say my thought was that I'm in my mid-30s now, and I grew up in Italy, and these conversations about engaging with youth were going on in the 90s and early 2000s back then. So it's been 20 years. So I'm very curious to see what happens next. But definitely, I would say that this generation is more politically engaged than mine was. So I'm feeling very hopeful and very curious about what happens next. So thank you very much to all the participants, to the panelists, and to the speakers, particularly those that logged in at midnight and at 5 a.m. You are heroes. And thank you so much for an interesting discussion. So it's a goodbye from me, and maybe see you at the next event.